Hello everybody, Dan here again. Today we're going to talk about planning and the general conventions we use when drawing a plan. I'll be dividing up the conventions into three different categories. So on your page, the first three boxes are line types, the next five are to do with numbers, and the remaining ones are to do with inclusions. So the list of planning conventions we have here in front of us is used persistently throughout British archaeology and the majority of the wider world. And it's pretty important to keep using these same conventions because plans are pretty much stripped back versions of the context that you have excavated. And therefore, anybody that picks up your drawing in maybe a year or 10 years or 100 years' time should be able to independently understand your drawing without having to reinterpret it themselves. So with the single context recording system which we use, each unit of archaeology that we define as being different from something else gets its own context number. It then has a written record, so a context sheet is written about it, and then a plan, a drawing of the context from above at a scale. And at the field school, we normally draw at a scale of 1 to 20. So the plan is a stripped back representation of what the context is, with the main focus being on the actual extent of the context and also what is inside of it. So the most important thing about a plan is that the context itself must form a complete shape, with no breaks in the line. Your plan may include several elements of the same context. For instance, if you had splodges of clay that you thought were all the same thing, you would draw all of those on one plan, but each of those must be a complete polygon. However, the line around each of those contexts can differ, and that's how we get into the different variations of line type that we can use on a plan. So the most commonly used line type to define the edge of a context is the solid line. You are fairly confident that this is the natural edge of the context. If you're less confident about the edge of the context and it becomes more diffuse in its relationship with surrounding other contexts, you might use a dashed line. Perhaps the second most commonly used line type is the double dot dash, and this represents a later archaeological feature that has already been removed. So for instance, if you were drawing an Iron Age clay floor and it had a bunch of late Roman pits cut through it that were dug either last week or 10 years ago perhaps, you would draw the extent of where those pits were using a double dotted dashed line and their corresponding cut number. On a busy, deeply stratified urban excavation, the context may have dozens and dozens of later features all cut through it, and each of those needs to be identified and numbered on your drawing. The third kind of line type used is the dot dash line, often referred to as an arbitrary edge. This is used to show that the context has been removed, cannot be shown, or does not continue for one of a number of reasons. Most commonly it's used as the actual edge of the excavated area. So we're saying this is not the natural edge of the context. Basically, the context would continue underneath the edge of the trench. It can also be used to explain the absence of a piece of context because of the actions by archaeologists. So perhaps you may put an exploratory slot through an area beforehand to try and work out what's going on before you start digging. Similarly, you might get a bit overzealous and just dig away something accidentally, so you might just have to explain why that isn't there anymore. The dot dash line can also be used to explain the absence of a context because of natural disturbance, most commonly animal burrows, but also things like roots and tree boles, or perhaps other post-depositional processes such as hill erosion. So on to numbers. So the most important number to have on your plan is the context number of the cut or deposit that you've actually drawn. This should go inside the context and use the correct convention to differentiate whether it is a cut or a fill, a positive or a negative feature. Positive contexts such as deposits, fills or floors go within an elliptical bubble or within rounded brackets, whereas cuts, negative features such as pits, ditches, foundation trenches, etc., go within a rectangle or within squared brackets. As mentioned before, later features which truncate through your context will also have to be labelled, so you may have to look through the records, find out what those numbers are and add them to your plan. Other numbers that you see on a plan might include small finds, sample numbers and spot heights placed on the drawing in the relevant place. If the plan spreads over a number of pieces of permatrace along the edges of each plan, you may see the plan number indicating the corresponding plan it matches with. So lastly, on to inclusions. So each context is likely to have a number of inclusions which you can describe in detail on the context sheet. However, on the plan, it's often good to draw any interesting or significant inclusions so as to characterise the nature of the context. If a context such as a deposit is relatively consistent across its whole, then you can draw a sample box, a small square around 20 centimetres in length, just as an indication of the entire deposit. Any other inclusions, however, that are inconsistent with the rest of the deposit or unusual in some way should be drawn in detail in the correct place. There's a number of different ways of doing this, shown in the list below. By keeping these consistent across all plans, it makes it a lot easier for people who are looking at these plans in the future to understand what's going on. Thanks for listening, everybody. I've got a few seconds left, so here's Gruff Reese to play us out with a song.
Digging deeper, I hit on an ancient lamp. Lift my spirit up and dig a bit deeper. Must be careful with my magnetometer. Excavation takes a long time. First we survey, then dig through the lineup. So make some space, no cars, I'm digging for treasure.